Hey guys, if you've been searching for weeks for the Jeep Cables install video for a TJ and not an XJ because there's 150,000 of them, then this is probably the video for you because it doesn't exist other than this. Unfortunately, another thing that doesn't exist is instructions because these, which I downloaded from the website, nothing came in the package but the wires and the fuses. So I downloaded this from the website. It's a PDF, and this is for TJs. This is pretty basic and useless. The majority of this information is XJs, YJs, ZJs, and these photos all pertain to generic stuff that's mostly not TJ. So what I did was, thankfully, they labeled all the wires. You can see the wires are pretty clearly labeled. That one says firewall, and each wire, the end of each wire, has a label on it that you can see. And so what I did was set the terminals up with the wires connected to where they go and laid them out on the table so I can just replace them one by one based on common knowledge. One thing that wasn't common knowledge, at least for me, is PDC. I had to actually look that up, and I was able to find out what it is, but I still don't know what that stands for. PDC is this secondary fuse box, or maybe this is the main fuse box. Maybe the secondary one is the one inside the glove compartment. But PDC is this. And so the wires that have the ends that have the PDC stamped on them, there's two of them. And one goes here, one goes here. So this one comes down and goes to, I believe, the alternator. And this one comes down and goes to the positive on the battery. So I guess it's no surprise that the kit's called a Big 7 because it comes with 7 wires. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. It comes with the fuse block and 2 different fuses. There's one 150 amp and one 200 amp. I'm deciding to do the 150 first and see if it blows. If it blows, then I'll put the 200 in. Reason being is that I'm also installing a higher performance alternator. The factory alternator is 117 amps, and this one puts out 160. So that's 10 above the fuse, but I'm not sure if that's really gonna pose a problem. But if it breaks, then I'll just replace it with a 200, and no harm, no foul. All right, next step was to get the factory wiring out. As I pulled it out, I labeled everything just to be safe, in case I ever need to put it back in or use it on another Jeep or a spare or something. So that's firewall, and we got alternator there, and there's starter, and that's engine block. I haven't labeled that yet. And then we got negative terminal, positive terminal, and then there's the PDC clamp that goes to the PDC box. And so once I pulled that off, I brought the kit wires in. I got 4 wires on mine because I'm running a winch. So my ground for my winch comes up along here, and I got it underneath my PDC and then wrapping around just so it sort of mimics the rest of the wiring. So I'll go through the wiring here. So this wire, that's my winch wire, my winch ground. Then the second one, this one here, that comes down. Makes it easier if you take your battery tray loose. You can't get it entirely out because of this goofy temperature sensor, unless you want to pull the grommet out of there, and then it won't go back in. But so this second wire, that comes down. I ran that down and through the bracket here, the battery mount bracket, ran it through here, and then back around out the back just to take up some slack because it was a little bit long. And then I ran it straight up the firewall to where my factory firewall ground was. I don't know if yours may not be there. That's where mine was. On the bolt that attaches the grill support bar. So that's the second wire. Third wire, the instructions on the kit say that some TJs have a fender ground, and mine didn't, but I figure there's no harm in adding one. So I ran the third wire to this spot right here. That was pretty convenient in terms of how long the wire is. And it kind of mimics the throw of the winch ground. And then the fourth, that is for your engine block. And that I ran down underneath, and I ran it behind the AC drain. Try and get a good angle here. That's the hose. If you ever notice, if you're sitting in the summertime, you notice there's a little puddle of water under your Jeep. That's where the AC, I guess the condenser or something, where it drains. I ran it behind there to suck up some of the slack, and then it bolts to the engine block, which that bolt is right back here, tucked back behind here's your oil filter. Look just above and behind, and that's where the bolt is for the engine block ground. All right, I've moved on to the positive wire installation, and I'm finding that it's not nearly as intuitive and straightforward. You're gonna have to do some modifications with a TJ. For instance, the PDC box, originally, this was the wire, the positive wire that goes up into the PDC box. And you'll notice that where it bolts down it's nice and wide, but then it gets narrow. And that narrow part is what comes in through the back wall of the PDC box. So with the Big 7 wiring, it's much too wide to fit it in that hole. So what you got to do is take what I did was take an X-Acto knife, and I just trimmed the sides back and forth until I was able to fit both wires in. But another issue is that on the factory harness, it actually cuts a 90-degree and shoots straight down, where you're not going to be able to do that with the kit wiring unless you were to cut off the eyelet and put on a different eyelet that was longer, that you could bend at a 90 degrees. But if you're going to do that, then what's the point of spending what you're spending on the kit? So what I'm going to have to do is take the lid and modify the lid. So the way it is now, when you have both of these wires, let me get this wire on here. When you have these wires on here in place, it would actually be the other way around, like this. So you got your wires on here and bolted and nutted down. And then when you go to close your lid, you're going to run into a problem because the lid is designed to cover that 90-degree angle bracket. So you're going to have to cut a square opening out of here. I'm going to try that first. I don't know if it's going to be strong enough. I mean, this is 19-year-old plastic, so I'm not sure if it's going to be structurally sound once I cut it. So if that doesn't work, if it's too flimsy, I'm probably just going to cut this whole. I'm going to have to cut this whole piece off, and then it should clear. I'm assuming, yeah. Then it should clear the wiring. But another word of advice is when you take this off, you got to be really careful because, as I said, this is 19-year-old plastic, and this is designed to snap onto this little bar here. And when I was taking mine off, I actually cracked the bar on this side, the little pin on this side. So it's a little bit loose. I don't want to pull on it too much. But you got to be really, really careful when you snap this off. And I don't think I want to be modifying this with it attached to the box in that pin, because if I happen to bump it or something, you could easily break that, and then then it's a trip to the junkyard to get a whole new box. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm gonna modify that opening and hopefully not have to take the whole thing off. But once I get that on, then I can play around with the wiring. But I see some trouble coming with the wire lengths, because if you look at, originally I was going to put the breaker, I was going to zip tie it up onto this, the grill support bar. But if you do that, then that brings this wire looping way back like this. And it's just going to be a pain in the butt to have that wire all the way back there like that, getting the battery in and out. So my solution is to try and get this to turn forward as soon as possible, as soon as it comes out of the PDC box. And I think if this wire was shorter, it would be a little bit easier to manage, because right now I would like to be able to mount it somehow, mount the breaker in the middle of the PDC box, the bracket that holds the box. But if I do that, I have the same problem. The wire just comes way back. So if that wire was shorter, that would actually be a lot easier. As it stands, I'm gonna have to mount it up towards the front of the bracket somehow, or I can mount it on the fender down here somehow. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm not sure why they made this wire so long. Maybe this is just it's transferred over from the XJ kit, so that's a length that's required for the XJ, and they just we'll just make it work for the TJ. And this, and on this end of the breaker, the same thing. The wire is so long, it comes all the way up to the front just to turn around and come all the way back to the alternator. And I'm going by what's marked on the wires, where I'm putting the eyelets. So I got it right according to the markings on the wires, and that's just how long the wires are. So I don't know if this is gonna be my final setup. I might wind up cutting. I don't want to have to cut the wires and then reinstall new eyelets on them. But if I have to make things a little bit more clean and not just all over the place, I think that's what I might end up doing. But I don't know. We'll see. All right, so here you have it. I tried trimming in stages to see if I could trim just enough to get those positive wires to pass through the opening. But in the end, I had to cut the entire hood off of here. And then notch it up to that lip there. So finally, with all that trimmed off, it'll come on here to where the snaps engage and it's secure. So that's what it takes. You got to just trim that entire hood off of there, triangulation and everything, and notch the lid. And also, as I said before, the opening in the base of the box is too narrow, because if you look at, where is it at? Yeah, if you look at this, as I said, there's this width right here is that's what bolts down, and this narrower part is what used to pass through the opening in the PDC box. And so that's way too narrow to fit those two leads through. So you're gonna have to trim the sides of the opening until you can get both wires to sneak through. And so as it stands, once the lid is on and snapped, there's no metal showing, so there's no danger of shorting on anything. I think I'm gonna end up cutting this wire is going to go to the positive on the battery, positive terminal, and it's just way too long. It could have been literally like this long. It's like they added, added wire that wasn't needed or something. I don't know. But this eyelet could have been right here, because the positive terminal's right here. And this side, I'm probably going to mount my breaker on the fender, and I don't know. It looks sloppy and a little bit goofy that this is running all the way up. Maybe I'll shorten this one too. I'm not sure. We'll see how it goes. All right, so as I said, I want to mount the breaker right about here. But the problem is that the mounting holes for the breaker are a good 1.5 inches from anything that I could mount them to. So what I decided to do was make a plate that can mount to this hole with a cap screw like this. And then the breaker has holes that can mount to like that. And so I'll crank that cap screw down really tight, and hopefully it's not going to spin or move. And maybe I'll put some thread lock on it, and then I can screw this onto here. And then I got my attachment points right where I want them. All right, so I just wrapped up the Jeep Cables Big 7 install. I'm gonna keep it quick and sweet because it's getting late and I need to go to bed. I didn't have time for the alternator, unfortunately. That's gonna have to go in this week sometime. I got a 160 amp PA Performance alternator to replace the factory 117 amp. So that should make a nice difference. But I'll just go through the wiring just to clarify what I did. So I got 4 lines coming off of the negative, actually 5 lines. This one goes up. I forget what that goes to, but that goes into this loom here. But the main 4 lines are my winch, that goes forward to my winch. The second one goes down and underneath the battery, and then it comes up and bolts to the firewall here on the bolt for the grill support. The third wire comes down and it bolts to the fender on this bolt here. That's a pretty convenient spot. And the fourth wire goes down under the battery, and behind that can there, you can't really see it, but it goes across and bolts to the engine block right behind the oil filter there. And for the hot, I got my winch line coming down and then forward. I got the one line coming off of for the PDC box that comes up and then into the PDC box, and then the third one goes back behind the battery and down into the starter solenoid. And then the last run of wire goes from the PDC box around to the breaker. I decided to go with the 200 amp breaker. From what I understand, the 150 is for a factory alternator, which is not going to be the case for me for very long. And so I go from the breaker forward and into the alternator. Like I said, in order to do the install, you're gonna have to modify the PDC box. This opening was way too small from factory. The bracket that fits in there is much smaller than these wires. So I used an X-Acto knife to cut this opening wider. And again, on the lid, there used to be a hood that came off of here, and I had to cut that off entirely and trim and notch this up to almost to that lip there in order to get it to be able to snap down on top of these wires. And I had to make a spot to bolt the breaker to. I had to make this plate out of aluminum, and I screwed the plate to the fender so I could screw the breaker to the plate, and that gives it a nice sturdy flat surface. Because the problem with these fenders is they just they're all over the place, and there's not a flat surface long enough to mount the breaker. So you got to make one, basically. So other than those modifications, it's pretty straightforward. Thankfully, all the wires were marked, as I showed before. Every wire shows on the shrink wrap where it starts and where it ends. So that helped a lot. I think some of these wires I'm gonna come back through here, just because I can't leave well enough alone, and make some. I'm gonna trim off a little bit of some wires, and I might replace. I actually might replace this wire because I want it to be longer. This wire I'd like to come out and go down and come underneath this AC line into the breaker, because I think that it just seems like it's kind of floating out in the middle of nowhere right now. I'd like it to be a little bit more stealthy. And I think this wire, I'm gonna wind up shortening it from this end, because I don't see any reason why it needs to come all the way out here just to turn around and come all the way back. But other than that, I'm happy with it. You know, it's designed for an XJ originally, I'm assuming, because of the wire lengths and stuff, and the lack of directions. I mean, the directions are basically anything specific in the directions is you know, it talks about ZJs and XJs and stuff. So, you know, for a kit that was designed for those other models to be able to fit on a TJ without, you know, much modification, that's a win-win for me. So yeah, that's it. Like I said earlier, you're not going to find another. I couldn't find another Big 7 install video on YouTube for a TJ. Every other one that I found were for XJs and ZJs, and I think there was a couple JKs. So this is probably the only video that you'll see on YouTube of a TJ, until somebody else starts making them. I don't know, but this is it. So if you drive a TJ, here you are. Hopefully this is useful. That's about it. I'm going to bed now. See ya.